et optag, det gør den nu. Så jeg har været meget spændt på at møde Jenny, og det kan jeg forstå, det har I også, siden I mødte talstærke op, så derfor tror jeg ikke, jeg vil bruge meget mere tid på at tale om det, men overlade ordet til Harry. So, Harry, that was a very short introduction from my part. Please take over and do as well as you can.
Okay. I asked Jenny to come on this show mainly for a couple of reasons. The first was we had her on our addiction Zoom room, and I love when people grow. And I had heard Jenny talk before, and it was nice. But when Jenny came on the show in December, I could feel that she had grown a tremendous amount. And she was sharing that with the way she does. And she has very beautiful feelings. And she listens in a beautiful way. And I really felt that because of her growth and her feelings, it would be a really great fit for our Danish feeling, the hygge feeling. Because even though she never probably even heard that word, she personifies it. And which again shows it's not in the word, but in the feeling. The other thing that I like about Jenny is she's worked a lot in the world, in Nepal and South Africa, with the underprivileged and poor. And in the Three Principles world, I have a little bit disgusted with how much money and stuff people are involved in, and that they have to be white and wealthy or well-to-do. And I myself work mostly with the underprivileged people. Not that you guys are, but I do a lot of that type of work. I'm more comfortable in that, I guess, and it brings out a side of me where I feel like I'm just giving. And Jenny has worked in Nepal and South Africa with the underprivileged in different scenarios, and I thought it would be wonderful for her to talk a little bit about that, and anything else you want to talk about too, Jenny. Please don't. You're free to talk what you want. And then at some point we would like to have a little bit of questions and answers and group discussion like the other sessions. So it's not just a webinar where you talk for and then ask a question or two at the end and everybody's asleep already. So or idolizing the talker. This is more like a group discussion type of thing. So with that in mind, I think it's nice for Danish people who have a big heart in terms of community, a big heart in terms of equality in the world, to hear a little bit about how some of these world efforts are going and so on. So with that small but wordy introduction, away you go.
Thank you. Well, as I said on the last webinar that my first teacher of the principles was Dr. Roger Mills, and he was a community psychologist. And really what struck me and hit me on the first training with him was the videos he showed of this work happening in communities and happening in jails. And that's what impacted me. And it feels really nice to have almost gone full circle and have started to do this kind of community work, because I love working with people who otherwise wouldn't have been able to hear about this. So the different opportunities, whenever people ask me to do things in other countries with the underprivileged, I'm like, I say yes to everyone. You don't have to be underprivileged for me to want to work with you, but it's an area where I can see people are so, it's almost like there's a lot of the people I got to work with had almost hit rock bottom, and they seemed so open to learning and so grateful to be able to have the opportunity to learn. But what I didn't expect is how much I was going to learn. I'd got a little bit arrogant that I knew these principles, and I felt so amazing that I could take them to these other countries, but I wasn't expecting to learn so much. And I hadn't realized how much it was going to be this two-way thing. And it really humbled me. and it showed me the power and the truth of the principles in action, regardless of if we've heard the words, the three principles. Because being in Nepal after the earthquakes, the resilience, the spirit, the feel of the people was just incredible. And I thought I was going over there to share something with them about resilience, where I got to witness the power of the human spirit and kindness and how people pull together and community. What was lovely is then we got to do some work with school children, we got to do some work in the hospitals, a couple of businesses, is to kind of bring the peace to them about recognizing thought in the moment, because some of them were still reliving the earthquake. Some of them were worrying that there was a lot of talk of this being, you know, a precursor to another big earthquake. So they were very much living in a future and had started to worry about that. So in some ways, they've already got such a sense of mind or God or spirit or behind life, but they hadn't kind of seen the thought feeling bit. So in a way, that was the conversation we had. But I learned a lot from them about oneness and mind and God. So it was a real privilege to be with them. And to be honest, the school kids, they were like, they'd moved on. They were not thinking about the earthquake. And we got to see these young kids who we realized we were teaching them about the principles, when actually they were just the principles in action, and it really hadn't been covered up. They weren't having to unlearn as much as I had when I came across this. So again, it's like I became the student a lot of the time, but sharing some of the little examples or some of the games we did with them, you saw them realizing limiting beliefs. So it was a real learning curve, and it was a real recognition of these principles are ever present in every being around the world. And it doesn't devalue the work that we all do, sharing this and pointing it out to people when it's been covered up. But it was the remembering of how close to the surface it really is and how present in everyone it already is. And then after that, I've had the opportunity to go out to South Africa and see ridiculous wealth and then ridiculous poverty and the huge divide, to experience racism kind of against me for being white. And that was very new for me. And I was with Dave, and he saw some guys at the side of the road, and the lady didn't even have trousers on. And he said, can I give them some money? And I said, if you want to, stop. So he stopped and went and gave this guy a hug and had a chat with him, and drove off. And he just burst into tears and needed to pull over. And he said it wasn't sadness. It was just like his heart opening for these people, and just the ridiculousness of how we're living as human beings when we live in this abundant universe, and then we live in these big divides and seeing what is keeping people stuck. And because of that, we both kind of went away and almost like brainstormed, what can we do to help? What can we do to bring the principles to South Africa? And just started talking to people and arranging meetings. So then we got the opportunity to work within a fantastic organisation and charity called Africa Tikkun, who are already doing incredible work in townships and with education, healthcare, social care. And they agreed for us to do a pilot study. So on the first course, we had, I think, 13 ladies who, on the first day, one of them spoke to us. And we kind of sat there, and it was quite an intense day, because normally we have dialogue, and there's just this one woman who would answer questions and give any feedback. And at the end of the day, she stayed behind, and she said that they don't trust you. And we're like, okay. She goes, did you notice they didn't talk to you? And we're like, yes, we definitely noticed that. And she said, well, the thing is, they're black and you're white. And we said, oh, okay, but how come you're communicating? She goes, well, I'm a Cape coloured. We had a very different relationship with the white people. So she kind of explained some of the history. And we kind of went away thinking, I wish we'd done a little bit of research before coming here to know a bit about the community we're going in to work with. And went back the second day, and Dave was like, well, how are we gonna deal with this? And he said, we're gonna have to deal with it head on. And he just said, he said to them, there is a big white elephant in this room, and me and Jenny are it. What do you see when you look at us? And it was like the floodgates opened, and it was like, you are rich, you have an easy life, you're privileged, you don't go to prison, you don't drink, you don't do drugs. And they just sort of went on, and we were like, wow. And then it was funny because Dave could sit there and he just laughed. He said, well, I've done every single one of those things apart from be rich. And they're all just like, and immediately, like the feeling in the room changed. And there was an openness. And then a new lady had joined the group, and she said, well, do you know how we normally start our groups? We're like, no. She said, well, we do an icebreaker. We said, okay, what kind of thing? And she said, right, well, today we're all going to have to spell our names with our bodies. We all had to take it in turns to stand at the front of the room and use our name to kind of spell letters. So I was incredibly embarrassed by this, but I joined in and got in the feel of it. And by the third day, we'd learned a huge amount from them. They'd learned a huge amount. They embraced the principles. They were in love with it. And they were coming away saying, I feel so powerful. And they said they started it as, you know, you white people and us black people. And by the end, it was, you're my brother and my sister. And we had questions of, do white people get jealous? Do white people, they were amazed that there were homeless people in the UK who were white. And most homeless actually in the UK are white. Really? They did not know that. And you could just see how much belief had got in the way. And they still saw it as white people keep them down. And they just realised that wasn't possible. They realised that was a belief, and that there had been systems in place in South Africa that were no longer there, but the mindset hadn't changed. So they again have been people who have completely changed how I see the principles. Like, they've deepened my understanding because they embody it. The lives that they have lived, where they've had children murdered, harbouring their nephew who's hiding from the police, children who are into TIC, the drug and prostitution, but these are still people who have gone into work and wanting to help their community. They exhibit the most resilient, joyful characters I've probably ever met. But at the same time, they have all the same kind of problems that the whole world is facing: depression, anxiety, domestic violence, addiction, abuse. But they saw that this was going to the root cause. Like, oh, these are all symptoms of misunderstanding. So they've gone home, and like, their families are changing, the way that they're then going into their community and working with people. And I think Roger used to speak about the ripple effect. Like, in a community, I think he said 10 to 20% of people get a sense of this, the whole community starts to change. And I felt so emotional on the last day, because you could see that all of those barriers, all of those thoughts, all of the things that got in the way were seen as thought. What separates us is thought. What unites us is thought. And it's a privilege to see that, and it's a privilege to see people wake up. Because I think what Sid uncovered, I still feel like we're scratching the surface of the depth of what he really saw. And working with people around the world and seeing change and shift happening, it's like, wow, what a privilege. We're alive in a time where there's something constant and true that's been recognised, that changes and transforms. So I've recognised for myself, I do need to live, because I love saying yes to everything. I'll volunteer, I'll do that. I still need to pay rent, and I still need to buy food and all of those kind of things. And there's nothing wrong with actually charging for things, and maybe trying to get jobs in a business and try and get the business to help fund the other work I want to do. We've got this incredible friend called Fiona Darcy, who's just helped us. Well, she's written the bid with a couple of other friends to try and get funding to work with reducing knife crime in East London with underprivileged communities. And the idea of trying to it will be 3 different boroughs, and it'll be workshops working closely with a charity. And it's like, if we can show change in these kind of communities, like, I have no idea how this could spread. And the UK is a lot smaller than America. So I think if something starts to work and other boroughs start to get interested, like, it could spread so much quicker. it feels like we're at the beginning of something. But I'm really excited to see over the next few years, like this is spreading. I was saying on the last webinar, I think when I first came across this, I pretty much knew people in the UK who'd come across this. And now I've got no idea. There's projects and conferences and then in Europe, it's exploded. And the fact that you guys are all coming together and having these, and then you're going off into your worlds doing what you do. Just, Sid would not believe it though, I don't think.
You bring up a really interesting point, Jenny. If you work, this has been my experience, if you work in what we call the high profile money projects, they're very good for your status and your resume. But if you want to grow as a human being and as a spiritual being, you working with the underprivileged, people in jails, natives, working with the addicted, working with the homeless. These are wonderful, wonderful places for personal growth and for opening up to the spiritual feelings of life. And I can really feel that you've owned that a little bit. And you're right, to get a nice balance between, you know, a project supporting an underprivileged project is a great idea. It's a great business plan, not a good one, a great business plan. And it really works well. And that's actually how I did it. You know, when I was younger, I would do exactly that. And then now I can just do what I want. So it's different, but it's the way to share. And I want to emphasize working with these underprivileged situations, more growth.
I think one of the things, I realised my own ego when I was in South Africa, because we'd obviously been working in the townships and hearing these stories of these lives I couldn't even imagine. And then I went and worked with, did some one-to-ones with a different community, a white community, a richer community. And I found myself being judgmental, thinking, well, what on earth are you worrying about? Your life's bloody easy. and then I saw it, because actually suffering is suffering, and it doesn't matter on our circumstance. It doesn't matter what has happened to us. Suffering is suffering. And I'd almost kind of seen, well, those guys are worthy of suffering because that's awful. Oh, but you guys, you shouldn't be suffering. And I realized I was in the outside in them, and I recognized my own ego and my own ideas. So it kind of, I love that this is always going to be, it's going to be us seeing again and us seeing again, and our own growth and our own misunderstanding. But it was such an amazing moment for me when I recognized I'm being judgmental that you shouldn't be suffering because I think your life looks, but it was equally, suffering is an inside job. Suffering is internal. And I know that when I watched the videos of the guys coming across this in jails, they were saying, I feel more peace now than I've ever felt. The prison isn't my jail, it was my own mind. And the same is true when I've done stuff, a little bit of stuff that I've done in business. It's like people recognize the prison they've been living in is in their own minds. So they might have the job and the life and everything they think they need to be happy, but they're not happy. So on top of that, they've then got guilt. I've got all of this, but I'm not happy. So then I feel guilty that I'm not happy. And you just see how suffering, what Sid uncovered was that suffering wasn't determined by circumstance or the past or our bank balance or any of those things. As human beings, we suffer misunderstanding. And that could be anyone at any time, and all of us probably at different times. And to see that was, I recognised a bit of my own ego, and it was quite humbling.
Could you, one of the questions I have when you were in South Africa teaching the youth and so on, could you just sort of show how you introduced the three principles to that group? Like first of all, you had to break the ice, which is obviously true in any cultural situation. And then the ice is broken and the feelings are in the room. How would you, like, just could you give us a little bit of what you would, how you would see it?
I think with the, it was teenagers we were working with when we were out there. So as you say, it was kind of getting to know them a little bit and seeing what they're interested in and how do they already see life, what makes sense to them. And then it's seeing where there is already understanding and kind of trying to draw more of that out of them by questioning.
Sorry, I missed that word. What was that word? What did she say?
Drawing out more understanding from them.
Okay, yeah.
And in the same way you do with adults, I guess, it's almost what's in the room, what's there, what examples can we use that might be relevant to them. And I told the story of Sid. So they were fascinated to hear about this guy called Sid from this tiny island. And one of them asked, well, if he was 9th grade educated and he didn't read books, how did he know all this stuff? And I remember laughing. I was like, how do you think information got into books? And they were like, Google. And then they're like, don't know. And you could see their mind just suddenly go, good point. You know, this knowledge wasn't of this world, wasn't in form. Someone had insight and put it into the world of form. So it almost opened up that dialogue with them of the intelligence behind life. And there's nothing wrong with education, there's nothing wrong with learning, but actually there's a part of us that we've completely neglected and forgotten about that's incredible. And there's this infinite connection to new thought, intuition, all these other realms of thought, which they'd kind of not given much thought to, because they were a very clever group of kids. And they just kind of sat there dumbfounded for a bit. There was a man who hadn't read loads of stuff, but had an insight, which is changing psychology, psychiatry, humanity, in a way that they just couldn't get their head around. Like they thought education meant intelligence. So it was a very outside in view of life and of worth, what it means to have worth. So we're worthy just for being. We're not worthy because of what grades we get or what job we have. So that was kind of just a way of having a chat with them. One of them was on medication for a couple of years and seeing different therapists because she had a phobia of going in lifts. And I think she sort of wanted us to fix that. And I just said, well, why don't you just take the stairs? And I think to her that was really, well, I need to go in lift. Why is it so important that we go in lifts? Well, and you could see she started thinking she's made not getting in lifts a massive problem. But actually the problem isn't the fact she doesn't like getting in lifts and she feels afraid of them. It's that she misunderstands her feeling and she thinks it's a problem. So she spent 2 years focusing on this. So it's almost like it was what showed up in the room was how we then spoke about it. And then we just take them back to the simplicity. Well, did you know that thought and feeling are like one thing happening in us? That it's not the lift that you're afraid of, it's thought. And then they all get a bit interested in that. And one of the questions, well, if you can't, she goes, well, now I don't really like going on aeroplanes either. So, well, you've got a beautiful country you live in. Maybe you won't go on it. You have to be able to go on an aeroplane. And you could just see, it's like, in itself, it's not the problem. It's what we think about it that's the problem. And she's been so used to people trying to change her thinking, change the fact she doesn't like lifts. Where we're saying, well, that's not really the problem here. The problem is you misunderstand feeling. And they get that. They really get a sense of that. And my dad just did an interview with my niece who's 10. And she's really picking this up. She picks her mum up on it and reminds her mum. Like, kids don't seem to question it as much because it is so logical and common sense, and they get a feel for it. They get a feel that, hang on, there's something here that you're telling me about that rings true. So I know that the Innate Health Centre in London and Terry Rubenstein has just been putting together the iHeart programme, which is like a curriculum to take into schools, and we can start kind of getting and collecting data of change. But it's a guide, because you're never going to know who's in the room and how they see life. So they've got this incredible curriculum, but they know that they want people to come on courses and learn about it. But what you share is going to be what comes to you in the moment with who you're with. So it's never the same twice. You can't really get bored with this work because it's always so different.
One of the things you mentioned that's really important is not to get involved in describing, trying to fix the kids' problems. And to me, that's where a lot of people in the three principles still get stuck a little bit in. And when you see that that has nothing to do, Sid never talked about problems with people. They'd come in with problems and he'd ignore it and get to the spiritual root of the person. And so I want to emphasize what Jenny is saying is very, very important as you work with other people, that you're not there to fix some kind of problem in their mind, because it's just in their mind. Of course, it's an illusion. And the second thing that I picked up, Jenny, is I think the kids picked up the feeling from you. You had a nice feeling. The kids actually don't care what you're talking about. You have a nice feeling. They respond to that intuitively, to that beautiful feeling that you have. And the rest takes care of itself, because as you mentioned the word trust, with kids, trust is very quick if you have the feeling, and trust is almost impossible if you don't have the feeling type of thing. So I just wanted to bring up those two points and so on. Does anyone have a question for Jenny about her working with these people or anything? Or a statement of something they've seen in their own life?
I have one. Jenny, you were working in Nepal as well, weren't you? Could you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, I think the inspiration for being in Nepal was Mahima Shrestha. She emailed and told us the story of, in the middle of the first earthquake, she had a wake-up experience. And she'd come across the principles maybe 8 months before in an airport, picked up a book, read a line or two, thought that was kind of good, I might get it on Kindle another time. And then maybe 3 months before the earthquake, she started to get a bit interested, watched some videos. And when the first earthquake hit, she said she was terrified and everyone was outside. And I think she observed her niece, who was 2 or 3, called Mika. And she was getting upset when the earth stopped shaking. And there was something in that she remembered the line from the book about 100% of our feeling is coming from thought, or something like that. I'm paraphrasing her. But she said she realized psychological safety. So she said she didn't become stupid. She recognized that physically she might not be safe, but psychologically she was free and safe. And she said she became so present and responsive. She said, I wasn't reactive, I was responsive. So she knew what to do. So I kind of got this email from her and I was blown away. So I just said, if there's anything we can do to help you or to help anyone in Nepal, anyone who you think is interested, let us know and we can give you videos, we can give you resources. And if you would like us to come out, we will. Just like a throwaway line. She's like, yeah, I'd love you to come out. I could arrange groups for you to speak to. And she got speaking in schools, the Chamber of Commerce, her dad's business. She got together a group of people, the hospital system. But it was I'd been to Russia and worked with an interpreter, but it was quite different working with interpreters in Nepal because these were just people volunteering to interpret. And some of the time, one of them was a psychology student and we would say something very little and then she would talk for 5 minutes and we're like, I'm not sure you're translating, like it's a specific point we're trying to make. So that's when you kind of realize there's something that got transmitted that was beyond the word, because I'm not sure about the translation. A bit like Harry was saying, I think people picked up from us that we were genuine, that we were trying to point to something. And there was one young girl called Joshna, who I think she was 15 and she came to help translate. And as Dave was talking, she was translating like beautifully, but then she was going, that's true. That's true. And I think she was impacted the most. And then she could start, because she got a feel for it, she could then translate in a way that really represented what we were saying. And she then continued to help with some webinars, and she's put subtitles on some of our videos in Nepali. Mahima managed to get some people together who are aid workers and give them recordings of the retreats that we'd been doing in England. And then all these aid workers went back into their field, and then she got to meet them a bit later, and the feedback was that normally they could only go back out for a couple of weeks, and it would just be so draining and exhausting. They'd need to come back and recoup. They said they weren't being affected by what was in front of them. They were staying energized, and they'd found something within themselves. And now they've all gone off to international posts around the world. So it was weird. It felt like it was about Nepal, and I'd offered to go and help Nepal. But really, I don't really know what seeds have been planted. And it did just feel like we were planting seeds, because we didn't have a huge amount of time with each group. But it just felt like, I think it was Amy Chen Mills saying, it's like you're throwing out these seeds. So we just said yes to speaking to anyone. We saw that there was a meeting happening. So we invited ourselves, and there was different aid workers, psychologists, and they were all talking about how are they going to get funding to help with medication for people, because a lot of people were experiencing anxiety and different things, and you could hear that the Western labels were kind of trying to come in. And I know one guy stood up and said, but what are we doing to respect the Nepali belief system, how they deal with these kind of things? What are we doing to learn about how they would, they've just had this massive earthquake. They've lost so many people they love. A lot of their temples are down, and they're allowed to be upset right now. We don't need to medicate them for that. And he was really we were like, you are awesome. So then we got to stand up and just say, look, we're running a little group. If anyone's interested in coming. I'd made Dave stand up because I was too nervous, and then he was shaking. And then a group of those people did come to a workshop that we ran. But it's weird. I don't know what the impact's been out there. I know that Joshna is sharing with people, and I know Mahima's doing incredible work, and she works in crisis response in aviation. And Mahima has a fantastic understanding. I learned a huge amount from Mahima. She's a dynamo. and she challenged my own understanding. So it's kind of I recognise that I'd like to be able to go back and see sometimes, where are people now? What did they hear? And get more feedback. So hopefully we'll get to go back again. And then with the WOW project with Terry Broughton, last March we were there, and we went to 7 different villages in 12 days and did workshops with the kids, again through translators. But a lot of the time Terry was wonderful because she's just playing with them. She was singing, and then we tried to do some visuals, so we didn't even need the translation. We drew pictures. This is how life looks like it works, but actually it works like this. And yeah, I don't know, Terry's going back in October, and she said she's so interested. What have we planted? What's happened since? But I think the thing that really has struck me everywhere I've gone is to respect the culture, to respect the people as they are, and respect what they know, and not, I don't know, it's this idea of respect, and not thinking I'm going in there to give them something. It's like drawing out of people. And I guess for me, being less, I'm so excited by the principles, but recognizing it's not something I have to give people. It's something that I'm reminding them they already have, and that it can show up in so many different ways, not on my agenda, or and that just the wordlessness and the human connection and loving people is really so much of it. Because I don't know why I heard, Roger did 3 days, and I was blown away, and it changed my life. But I didn't know the words, and I didn't know half of. But the more I'm around the principles, I realise how little I do know, because there is just so much knowledge. it feels like I'm constantly scratching the surface, but it's been nice to just recognize truth, love, resilience in people and speak to that. And I think that's powerful. And then you've got almost the words, the understanding, which kind of can explain to them how they get to have that feeling. Like the feeling comes from within them. I don't give them love. That comes from within them because they work exactly the same as me. But when their minds calm down, they naturally touch that space. And that's always there. But as their thinking kind of speeds up and looks very real, it can feel like we're disconnected, but we're never disconnected. So then I think you said it before, Harry, it's not the content of what people are thinking or what their lives look like. It's misunderstanding that who we really are, what's always present. We don't have to connect to something. It's allowing our minds to settle, to remember who we are. And that's a very different way to how I used to see it, because I would have had my idea of what people needed to see. By the end of this course, I want you to see all this. I've got so much stuff you have to see. Whereas I realised you share something really simple and people see their own incredible insight. We listened to an old Sid audio today with the couple we were working with. And I had thinking in it, like, what are they making of Sid? Like I don't know if you'd heard much of Sid before. Are they enjoying it? Are they bored? Do they think, why are you playing an audio when you're here in person? And at the end we said, what did you think? And what he'd heard was something about recognizing that problems exist in the world of thought. But when you go before, there is no problem. And he said, it's nothing, but it's everything. And he said, sorry, I can't really put it into words. And we're like, you just stay with that. And I don't know if I'm contradicting myself from the start, but I just love working with anyone and seeing them wake up, because I don't know now where they're going to go and who they get to share with. And we've had a conversation recently where potentially we could have worked with a company, but I don't agree with their ethos. And it could have potentially paid a lot. And I just said, where I'm at right now, I don't want to work with that company. And then, but I'm going to pass this on to somebody else who I know sees life differently from me. And I recognise I have my own beliefs, because actually I believe everyone should have the opportunity to wake up to this, regardless of who they are. But I have my own belief systems and my own stuff that I don't see as thought. And that's nice to remember. Like, it's my favourite Sid quote is something like, everything we believe to be true about ourselves and this world is ego. I'm like, well, that's everything then. It's all a story. It's all made up. But what the principles do is take you before that. And then you get to go back and share what you've seen. And I'm sure, Harry, I'm probably saying some completely different things on this call than I did when I spoke to you last time, and even maybe contradicting myself. But that's what I love about the understanding, is that it's not in these words.
And you're always growing. One of the things that I think is very important to emphasize with what you were talking about, this is for you, Jenny, is there was a time I was brought for a week to teach a Native community, and where I was staying in the hotel was a different community, and as a perk or as a trade, I had to talk to all their elders and so on. And it was the end of my week, and I said, the heck with it. I'm just going to go for it for once, instead of trying to, make a good presentation and be impressive and all that. I just let go. It was the last talk anyway. And it was by far the best talk I had ever given. And I was inspired by the freedom I felt and the applause I got. You never get applause in a Native community. It's impossible. And I got applause. I thought, wow, the elders even got off their chairs, and they never move off their chairs. They're just too laid back to do that. And I left. I says, well, if this didn't leave an imprint and a change, nothing will that I can do. And then I never heard anything about it for years and years. And then I met Melinda Eagle-Klein at a conference. She's a native 3P practitioner, and she's working in Powhatan in the community. All I did was open the door to the opportunity for someone else to come in, and it was like a chain reaction. And I went, wow, this is so beautiful. Spiritually, I gave my heart and soul to the best of my ability at my level then. And then the rest took off in the spiritual realm of life. And it's important to see life like that. It's not a short-term cause and effect like investors in the stock market. Oh, I got to make I lost. It's not that. It's a much more laid back type of experience of watching the mystery unfold. And you described that beautifully, Jenny, beautifully.
Does anyone else have questions or comments?
Hmm?
Does anyone else have any questions or comments?
Well, maybe somebody could make a comparison to Denmark to what she was talking about and how Denmark sort of sees how to deal with community, as you're an evolved culture in that way, in certain ways.
Well, I don't think we have the same, we're not really that far ahead in Denmark. I was talking to, here in August, September, I was talking to Kenny Albrechtson, who has been dealing or helping out together with his wife with Ira Gamara in Chicago. I think that they did some work over there. And we were talking about doing something here in the greater Copenhagen area, including Malmö in Sweden, because we are very much pestered by violence in this area, and we wanted to do something about it. And we thought that it might be a very big mouthful, the greater Copenhagen area, etc., and two, 3 people. And what we settled on was he is into integration in Sweden. And I thought, well, if I'm going to take this on at this early stage in my life, I thought that perhaps I should try to do a pilot in order to convince the people that was going to fund it that we were talking about something that was really serious. So consequently, I took contact to Jacqueline Hollows in England, and I'm going to see her over the weekend, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. She's doing a mind spa, and I thought I would use the opportunity to talk about her. We have planned to do some cooperation on that in order just to get the thing started. And I keep asking myself, really, do I really need that, or do all I need is to put on a jacket and then to go into the rough places in Copenhagen and start talking to people instead? And I haven't really convinced myself, because it's not probably because I'm too scared. But anyhow, this is some of the things, and that's why I really was rather curious about the things that you're going to have to do in London in the 3 boroughs, and how you're going to fund it. But then obviously you have some relevant data that you can show the funding prospects, or what?
I think they want it to be a new approach, so that we're honest about the fact, this is going to be, there's not many projects happening like this in the UK. We've got the on the 3 Principles movie site, there is a section which has all the research that has happened and some of its publications. There's only a few that are definitely research. We got very told off for calling it research when it was a publication. We had no idea there was a difference. But there is a lot of evidence about change in communities, in prisons, in business. Tom Kelly and Roger Mills and different people in America have got a lot of evidence base for this understanding.
Yeah.
I went to Elsie Spittle's talk in London. She just did a morning for the Innate Health Centre. And she was telling stories of the community work she's done. And I didn't know the extent of the work she'd done in communities. And she was saying that she was kind of knocking on doors and writing letters, and it didn't feel like anything was happening. And then she sort of almost let it go. And then someone contacted her. So all of these letters she'd been writing and trying to get in with certain organisations, like at some point somebody heard something and got back to her. I hear you've been looking for. And then I think she got to do the project in Los Angeles with the homeless community. A Place Like No Other was the video that they did about it. And I think that was the name of the homeless shelter. Yeah. And I think there's already so many up and running charities and organisations wanting to help. They've got the same vision of us, but they don't really have the piece of the principles, in that a lot of what they try and deliver is outside in things. Let's try and paint it so it looks nice. So let's try and have yoga classes and all these things which are really, really nice. But if you don't go to the cause of why these problems are happening, so it feels like you have something to bring organisations that actually they probably haven't considered. It'll probably seem too simple, but that might be a way in. It's like you on your own trying to go in and make change, but connecting with already existing communities and charities and organisations. So just seeing what is in your area, who's already trying to make change, who is interested in social change, what businesses need to fund things as part, because a lot of businesses have to do some charitable work. So what kind of things available? I just went online and Googled funding for projects on wellbeing in London, and then loads of stuff came up. The other one we'd like to do is in Northern Ireland, working to bring people together, and that needed to show that we'd already done a bit of groundwork. So it's like, okay, we might need to do a little pilot project, like run a 3-day and see who we can get, because they needed to show that you're already in with the community before they'll fund it. Yeah. But there is funding available for brand new projects. It's almost like just putting the feelers out, having conversations, and knowing that you have something incredible to offer the world. The little bit that I feel like I've seen of these principles, I think, is so incredible. I'm so grateful. Yeah. And that people just don't realise that they've got a missing piece. The outside in illusion is very strong, and it looks like what they're doing is all they can do, but what you have to bring an organisation would be incredible. So I think it's recognising that sometimes we're kind of stronger together, and just find people already doing the kind of work you'd like to do, and then introduce what you know to it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
And maybe I could add one. Oh, go ahead, Chris, you go, please.
Yeah, hi. I was just thinking, when you go out to these communities, wherever it is, do you actually tell them that now we're going to talk about the 3 principles, but you have another headline for what you're doing? It's just kind of, because explaining the 3 principles can be a little bit tricky, huh?
It has varied. If it's already been introduced as the 3 principles, then we'll do our best to give an overview of the 3 principles, because otherwise everyone's sat the whole day going, when are you going to tell me what these 3 principles are?
Yeah.
But if it hasn't been introduced in that way, then again, it's like getting feedback from the room. Who's in the room? What do they already know? And then you can talk about the principles without needing to define it as a thing. Mm-hmm. We'll still talk about thought, we'll still talk about consciousness, and we'll still talk about mind, but not as like a thing. Then there's been other times where it's felt really relevant. Like I know I loved hearing how Keith and Valda share the principles, seeing the paradigm that's created from them. And that has been so helpful in different times, because it's almost like the room can get heady, but then when you have that black and white discriminator and you have a visual, which I often just draw myself, mm-hmm. The principles creates that. So what we're pointing to is before, but sometimes it's nice to go, yeah, this is what we can see. This is something watertight. So it's a bit of a wishy-washy answer, but it really depends on the people in the room, we often talk about resilience, our robustness. We try and have titles that might attract people, like speak their language, because what I got from Mahima in Nepal was, I've been around this 13 years. It's been I've grown up with it now. I forget what it was like the first time I heard it, because I'm just in with the lingo and all these words. Yeah. So it's trying to remember that actually for someone, when this is brand new, there's a way that you can talk about this without it being in like an in-crowd language, if that makes sense. And that's been really good.
Yeah. Well, the thing is, in the beginning, when I got into the principles 4 or 5 years ago, something like that, and I was kind of, wow, and, you know, and then I think I got a bit intellectual about it all. I don't know, but at one point I went into, did some volunteer work, talking to people who were homeless. And in a way it was a success because they just wanted more. But I was also maybe struggling a little bit with my own understanding. But what I learned from it was that I could really see the power of thought. It's very obvious when you see it in other people. It's not that obvious always when you see it in yourself, if you get what I mean. Mm. But just seeing that, wow, yeah, we have these kind of ideas or thoughts that seem to be so real. How to treat our other people, or how other people should treat us, whatever. And then all these stories that this was a drug addict, one of them. You know, all these stories you build up to who's to blame, or who this person or this situation gave me so much pain, and you know, you can get into this labyrinth of thought, and you can't really see that it's you know, it could disappear like this. You know, it's really just your own virtual little movie. So in a way, I don't know if I think I did help some people, but I learned a lot about, in a way, because it was more and more obvious that the power of thought is actually what's going on all the time. So putting up the mirror and looking the other way, or kind of looking in, getting it in your own inner inside, it's quite humbling. So, and I think that's what you were talking about before, was that you recognize that, yeah, I'm no different from them. And then that's really a good insight, yeah, because that just kind of nivelates everything. We're on the same journey, or we're the same spiritual creatures, all of us. So I thought that was that's very nice, and so that might be a good reason to go out and do some of this kind of work, because you get more real.
And you taste your own medicine.
Yeah.
Yeah, because so much of what we say is for us too, and you're learning from yourself as you speak. And I feel like the people that seem to hear more, when they're listening for themselves, they're not listening to how to share this with other people, because it's like an invitation to get to know the truth of yourself, because then you know others, because we're the same. So I think it's like Dave, my partner, who he came across this and was seeing a therapist for about 9 weeks, and then he took a morning off work to watch some Sid Banks. And he doesn't know what he heard, but he started to feel different. And he went out and was overlooking a hillside near where he lived, and a crow flew past. And he just said he recognized mind, thought, and consciousness in the crow, and then he realized it for himself. And he said he woke up that day and he wanted to share. So he approached a homeless shelter. Can I run a group here? And he just started sharing what he'd seen. And he said, and it wasn't in anyone else's words, it was from what he'd seen. And he has been on a few courses, he's been on conferences, but his learning has come from within him. And I think that's what Sid was pointing us to. And I think it's absolutely incredible that there's so much out there now with the principles. It's beautiful, it's amazing, and people want to share, but we can miss the point or forget the message that we were being pointed within ourselves, within truth that lies within us. And seeing the impact that those groups had, we bump into people all the time that have been on one of his groups. He just started running a weekly group, and he said, I didn't really know what I was talking about, but I woke up to something true, and I started sharing from there. And it's a reminder of, you know, this experience that Sid had didn't come from books, and it didn't come from someone else. It came from within him. And then he was trying to point us back within. And then we can make it an outside, the principle's an outside thing that we need to learn to share, rather than recognizing we are already it. We've got this beautiful language where we can talk about it now, but like doing this group, you guys, you've got your own language. You have to come up with other words that describe what mind, thought, and consciousness are trying to point to. So we can see that it's not in the words mind, thought, and consciousness. Sidney Banks was Scottish, so English words came to him. But if he'd been, you know, French or Danish, it would have come to him in that way. So we know that it's not the words. And like finding our own voice and just going out and sharing what we've seen. Even like you said, it may have been clumsy. It may not have been what you'd say now, but it's a genuineness because you're sharing from what you've seen. Because you could go to a talk with someone talking the most amazing speech about this. If they don't know what they're saying, if they haven't felt that, it's not a truth for them, I don't think it will have very much impact. Whereas most people, the emails we get about the Three Principles movie site are from the transformational stories. It's not people trying to teach the principles. It's people sharing their own change, their own realizations. And that's what impacts people. Because that shift is what we all have the potential to wake up to. Like it's an internal one. It's not in the world of form. We're like it's pointing us before. And so it's, however clumsy we think we might be, if we're sharing from like a place that we're just lit up, that we've woken up and we want to share that with people, then I don't know, I think it's, to me, that speaks more than, I used to worry I wasn't eloquent enough and I couldn't speak like that person and I didn't know how to spell this, so I could never write anything on the board. Whereas now I'm like, I could just write it on the board and say I'm not that good at spelling, and it's like I'm taking myself less and less and less seriously. And what comes out of my mouth sometimes, I'm like, I cannot believe I just said that. Like I remember when I was going to the conference in Finland, I can't even remember what I said, but I basically had out to myself that we were going to Helsinki. And I was like, oh, I thought that was in Norway or something. I just said, and everyone was like, your geography is terrible. And before I'd have been embarrassed by that, like I had a persona that I needed to keep up. I'm like, yeah, my geography is terrible. I have no idea where anywhere is. I haven't got anything to defend anymore, or to, like Rudy always used to say, you get more foolish. Like he thought being spiritual was about getting wiser, and he said, oh, I'm getting more and more foolish and laughing at myself more and not believing what's coming out of my mouth. And then I think it's George Pransky that says that what the world suffers from is chronic seriousness. And even with the principles, like it's not a serious thing. And I love it on retreats when everyone's just cracking up laughing. And the teaching points are so small. Like when we do retreats, we ran one in October in the Lake District, and we were just laughing. And our dog Rusty comes to all the retreats and always sits with us, and he manages to communicate through Dave. Like he has his own, there's a particular voice that Dave does, which is for Rusty. So then we'll be like, Rusty, what do you think about the principles? And then he just comes out with these absurd, often a bit rude comments. And it's like you can feel the tension in the room. Just like, this isn't a serious conversation. This isn't like a heady thing. It becomes fun. And I think the times when I've gone in there, like I've got this serious message and I need to communicate it to people, like I'm tense. people pick up on that, like, you're tense, like, this doesn't feel very nice. So it's almost like have fun with it.
I just wanted to say I'm very touched with what you said, and the story about Dave and the crow, it really touched me. Did you look behind me, the wing? Because this, for me, I had this experience with birds at one point, and I also had this feeling of this connection to mind or whatever it is, but it really blew my mind. And I think what's happening right now in the world and what you're doing is, in a way, we have this collective amnesia. We could, you know, and people start waking up and saying, "Well, yeah, you know," you start looking differently at your life or at other people, or, you know, it's kind of getting the real story instead of the fake one. Mm. And I guess I know, but your father, he's a school teacher, isn't he?
Yeah, head teacher. Ex-head teacher.
Yeah. So, you know, and suddenly, you know, you get into being yourself instead of being, you know, living up to whatever someone else wanted for you. And I think it's beautiful. Thank you very, very much.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I didn't realise that I was going to learn the principles and be all right with being ridiculous sometimes. And just some of the things I come out with that normally I wouldn't have said because I'd have worried I'd look stupid. I can ask questions now. Like, if I don't know what a word means, I can ask someone. It's like you get real, you get authentic. And then other people are like, oh, okay, maybe I could. I'm loving at the moment, we run a group in Kendal as often as we can. See you later, Thomas. And we're getting teenagers show up. And it's like they're like, oh, we've been learning about this. And they've been actively going on YouTube, listening to clips. They're interested in consciousness. And they're like 15 up to 19 at the moment. And they're choosing to come along to this community group with often a group of people a lot older than them. Like, I just think that there's a waking up happening in the world, and the principles is an incredible way to articulate it, but it's happening. And to encourage that in people. And we just say to them, come and listen, but you've already got such a feel for this. Share that. Share what you've seen. Like, don't copy our words. They're a guide. And it is, I've loved being able to go off and explore other things over the last couple of years and listen to different webinars and different speakers outside of the community. But then I often come back to the simplicity and recognize that seeing thought as a principle, seeing thought as the missing link, is something that I don't know is often seen. And that is what Sid's gift was, like that simplicity. And I've loved being able to go back to that and recognizing that it's to see that for ourselves, the simplicity, remember we're home, and then words find us and our own voice finds us. And it's so much nicer than having to, like, I've got a terrible memory. Like, you probably know my quotes are terrible. I misquote people. And so my memory for those kind of things and details isn't brilliant, but you don't have to remember any of this. It'll be in the moment what shows up. And I remember saying to Keith and Valda that I feel like seeing this as a paradigm, seeing it in black and white, I made the shift from thinking, I was on board with the principles, but they talk about the mixed paradigm where sometimes we see that it's thought and sometimes we think there's something else involved as well. Like, maybe it is really that situation. That internal shift happens where you recognize we're living in a created reality within our own mind, and so is everyone else. When you see that and you come from there, what you talk about is different. Like, it does resonate with people. And I don't know, it's like it doesn't become a teaching anymore. It's more of just a recognition in others and recognition in yourself, or in a bird. Like, Dave talks a lot about the principles in the natural world and putting us back together with the natural world, putting us back together with animals. Like, when did we stop thinking we were an animal? He speaks about knowledge spanning he talks about thorns. And I remember when he spoke about it, I was like, why are you talking about thorns? But he used to be a tree surgeon, so they were the bane of his life. He was always pulling them out of himself. And he said one time he just went, how does this work? The thorn, and he said he pondered it, and what came to him was, this thorn works because I have a nervous system. The plant doesn't have a nervous system, but there's knowledge built into a plant of an animal with a nervous system. And that's why it works. And he was like, well, how does it know? And then he recognized, well, it's all knowledge. We're connected through knowledge. We're connected through the principles. So it's just that it's one system. And he sees so many examples of that in the world. And that's how he loves to share the principles. That it took it out of being a human thing for me, like the human psychology. And I saw Sid was talking about universal principles, not just us humans. It was so much bigger than I'd realized. And I saw the relevance of why he loves to talk about the leaves having knowledge built into them of the sun, the celestial body that it's never met, but it's built into it the knowledge that it gets sunlight and turns it to sugar, because it's all knowledge. It's all the same stuff. It's all the same energy. And I was like, wow, this is so beyond anything I thought the principles was about, because I'd got interested in the human psychology and how I was doing with the principles and whether I was being more compassionate. And I made it about me and I made it personal. Whereas seeing it as this big picture, this universal principles, it's like you get to be in awe of something. Like you're in awe of, I'm just scratching the surface of this infinite knowledge. And it can show up in any way. So for Dave, he loves nature, he loves birds. That's where he sees it. And I've started to notice so much more of my surroundings, because I thought look within meant look within me, within my personality. I'm like, oh my goodness. Like Sid was always saying, it's not in the content, it's not in what you think. He was talking about looking within truth. And that doesn't reside within our body, it resides around us. It's everywhere, it's everything. So I've absolutely loved learning from him. And he's someone that hasn't had loads of formal training. I think he's read some of The Missing Link. Like, he hasn't read loads of stuff. He loves listening to some of Sid's old audios, but he shares from his own voice. And it's inspired me to find my own voice, because I recognised I'd wanted to sound good. I'd wanted to sound like that person. So I always just want to encourage people to find their own voice. And how do you like to talk about it? How do you come alive? Who do you love sharing with? It's like, go and do that. And it's so much simpler than we think. And when we realise it's within us, then we can trust ourselves to be able to show up with people and share. And it doesn't matter if it's clumsy, because what is clumsy?
Everything you said in the native world would say that everything is sacred. And you express that beautifully.
Well, is this a proper note to say thank you to Jenny? It was a pleasure. It was really a pleasure. What do you think, Harry? What do you think?
Absolutely. A beautiful place to stop. And of course, thank you so much, Jenny, for sharing those beautiful feelings and your growth and your love of working with such a unique mind like your partner. Thank you.
I was going to say, if anyone wanted to contact me, they'd be welcome to. I'm trying to think the easiest, info@freedomthinking.co.uk.
Freedom Thinking, is that the name of your company?
Yeah.
Okay.
I think Jon Stewart once said about Bruce Springsteen that every time he plays, he empties the tank. And I think that you just emptied the tank. I think it was wonderful. Thank you very much, Anne.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jenny.
Thank you for your honesty. Thank you.
Thank you.
Beautiful feelings.
Yeah.